Okay, I'm not going to Monday morning quarterback this one. I'm not going to say the obvious, which is why didn't they bring Max in the lap after Lewis came in for his second stop? They might then have had a race to the finish, and Max might well have won the Spanish Grand Prix. No, it's too easy to say that, too easy to talk about it after the event. Red Bull obviously went into that race thinking they could win it on a one-stop strategy, particularly if Max got in front, and they stuck to that strategy, and we just got to accept that. Now, for me, well, there were two things in this race that were outstanding, and well, three actually. If I think about it, three outstanding elements, and I'm going to go through those. One was the start. As I said yesterday in the video yesterday, turn one was going to be extremely interesting. I thought the first telling moment was when Lewis was pulling away on the formation lap and said, wow, there's a lot of rubber on the inside. Meaning on the dirty side of the grid, as I'd been referring to it yesterday. So in other words, it wasn't that dirty in Lewis's mind. Now, the point here is, why was he saying it then? Why didn't he notice that because the engineers came back and said, yeah, we saw that last night, Lewis, we don't think it's going to be a problem, or something like that, to put his mind at rest. But that's the sort of thing that should have been talked about on a Saturday night. The last thing you want is your driver on the pole setting off on the formation lap and suddenly noticing that it's actually quite grippy on the inside. That to me is, well, I think it's great preparation by Mercedes that they knew that. I'm surprised that Lewis didn't know that until he was on the grid and driving away. And because of that, it would have been somewhere in his mind that maybe Max is going to make a better start than he normally would from that position. And sure enough, that's what happened. I say all that because Lewis did make a good start, but yes, sure enough, Max Verstappen also made a pretty grippy start from P2 on the grid. And as they were going towards the first corner, as Lewis said immediately as he got out of the car, he was kind of surprised at how good a start Max had made. That's what he was thinking about. And that's odd, I think, that Mercedes would have put Lewis in a position where he was thinking about that rather than other stuff. And what was the other stuff he could have been thinking about going into turn one? Well, I'll tell you exactly what it was, what it should have been. It was the graphic that we've been seeing all year and what we've been saying for about a year and a half, that Max Verstappen is not a late breaker. He's an early breaker. He's actually an earlier breaker than his teammate Sergio Perez. We saw it on a graphic yesterday just before qualifying or during qualifying that Perez actually breaks later into turn 10 than Max Verstappen. But that's the way Max drives. He gives himself a very, very stable platform, and then he's incredibly supple and manipulative with what he does with the car thereafter. But we'll talk about that in a little bit because that showed up in the race big time. Anyway, going towards turn one, Lewis is not thinking Max for sure is going to break early. I'm going to take the lead here. I'm going to keep the lead. He was thinking, wow, Max Verstappen's made a good start. And then he suddenly saw Max on his inside. And that was it. And Max was through into the lead. Now, I was surprised that that happened. A great pass by Max Verstappen, but really he braked incredibly early. And Lewis had lots of time to get into that corner and dominate the turn 1-2 section. If you look at how late, for example, Daniel Ricciardo braked, it was like, I don't know, 20, 30 meters later than Max Verstappen. And certainly Max braked, I would say, 10 meters earlier than Lewis going into turn one. Anyway, that's what happened. And I think that was all coming back to Lewis only suddenly noticing on the grid how much rubber there was on the other side and thinking about that perhaps as he was going down to turn one. That's point one. Point two is that when they were on the track together, and the perfect moment was when they were both on medium tyres after the first stop. It was then, I think, that we saw this race in its true colours, which was Max Verstappen on older medium tyres, 5 laps older, Lewis Hamilton behind him, and we had some just amazing aerial shots and onboard shots of these two drivers. There were perfect comparisons all around the lap. And for me, the outstanding thing at that moment was how Lewis had the car so much flatter than Max Verstappen, how early he was going into all the corners. And it's not just a question of the line he was taking, it was the way he was coming out of the brakes, it was the way he was getting the car beautifully stable and all the time using less road than Max Verstappen. Using less road, let's also use the phrase Max Verstappen making the corners go on for longer. I'd never realized that about Max. I'd never seen him in true comparison with Lewis Hamilton like that before, on the same compound Pirelli at the same phase of the race without any traffic to annoy either of them. It was just amazing how Lewis's very, very short corners and his incredibly good early turn-in worked alongside Max. And you could see that for the same lap time, the amount of energy that Max was having to put through the Pirelli medium compound was absolutely for sure greater than that Lewis is doing. Putting aside, of course, the characteristics of the Honda engine and the Mercedes, just talking about pure driving. And you noticed it particularly, I mentioned it on Friday, you noticed it particularly as they came out of turn 2 into turn 3, Max was doing one of these, really loading up the car. Of course, he wasn't any slower than Lewis there, but to do the same speed into 3 and out of 3, he was asking more of the tyres. And Lewis, you could see Lewis just turning in a metre earlier. And it wasn't just the line, it was the way he was coming out of 2 and what he had done with the car in the middle of turn 2. So at that moment, for me, that's where Lewis Hamilton earned his Spanish Grand Prix victory. Just superb. And it's not easy when you're following another car because your tire deg is going to be high, your brake temperatures are going to go up, and of course you've got a vision thing going on as well. And then he was just all over it. Max's tires were starting to go away, and it was as Max said, I'm not sure these tires are going to last the race distance, that Lewis came in according to instructions and the plan on a 2-stop strategy to put on another set of, wasn't new, it was a used, very 0-mile set of Pirelli medium tyres, and went out 22-second gap to Max Verstappen, passed him with 5 laps to go before the end of the race. Just a fabulous drive. Now, as I say, you could argue now that had Red Bull brought Max in the lap after Lewis, yes, he may have come out behind Lewis, but there would have been a motor race and they would have been fairly close to one another. Probably, though, with Lewis in front, the way he had been driving and the way he'd looked alongside Max and the way he'd used the tyres, it's unlikely that Max would have won that race. But it would have been a much closer finish, that is for sure.